Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore the fascinating topic of the wise cyborg. With me is Professor Thomas Lombardo, the director of the Center for Future Consciousness in Glendale, Arizona. He is the author of many books about the future and about wisdom, including Wisdom, Consciousness, and the Future, a collection of essays. His most recent book, Future Consciousness, The Path to Purposeful Evolution. Another title is The Evolution of Future Consciousness, and also Mind Flight, a journey into the future. Welcome, Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Jeff, and it's good to be here.
Pleasure to be with you once again. And
yes.
This is going to be a very exciting topic, I think, for two reasons. One, because cyborgs have fascinated people throughout the history of science fiction literature, which is one of your specialties, but also because as I look about our culture, it seems as if we are moving headlong into rapidly transforming the human species into cyborg-like beings, and who knows where it's going to end up.
Yes, we definitely are becoming more and more cyborg-like. But I would suggest that we've been cyborgs for the last couple million years.
Ever since the first hominid picked up a stick to use as a tool.
Yes. A definition of a cyborg is a functional synthesis of the biological and the technological. And so in that sense, once we began to use tools and create instruments and modify our environment for habitats and begin to wear clothes and jewelry and develop musical instruments, all of those are ways in which we became increasingly cyborg-like.
And now we're entering, I think, into a new phase where people can actually, for example, implant computer chips.
Yes, because now we're developing increasingly intelligent technologies which can augment our mental and psychological and communication capacities. And we are increasingly able to inject these technologies into our physical bodies. The smartphone is a temporary phenomena. One more generation and it's going to go in the head. Yeah.
Well, and that'll be, one might even call it an evolutionary leap.
Yes. Yes.
For people. Now, in reviewing the science fiction literature, you have cyborgs and you have androids.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about the distinction.
Yes, a cyborg is a combination of the biological and the technological. An android, the term was first used in the 1880s in a French science fiction novel called The Future Eve. That was an artificially created, intelligent human, Eve. And there's a blur between whether you want to call something an android or whether you want to call something a robot. One way you can make the distinction would be that an android has various biological, probably biologically designed features to it, but Data is referred to on Star Trek as an android, and he seems to be entirely built up out of what we would call robotic parts. So those two concepts blur. Cyborg is, in fact, a combination of the biological and technological.
And there are today physicists, one person I've interviewed, Jack Sarfati, is a physicist who believes in the future we will have conscious computer chips, so that maybe the distinction between an android and a cyborg and a robot will become very, very blurred in the future.
Yes, in fact, there is a MIT technologist, Rodney Brooks, who says something to the nature of, in the future, the distinction between humans and robots, I was going to say U-bots.
That's a nice term.
Yes, U-bots. The distinction between humans and robots is going to disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would suggest that there will be humans that will take on new sizes and new shapes and new capacities. Probably, it'll be almost impossible for us to imagine today what the human of 100 or 200 years, which is a relatively short time, 5-10 generations, will be like.
Yes, in fact, one scenario that you find both in future studies and in science fiction is that we are coming to the end of a relatively uniform single human species, that we are going to diversify along many, many different lines. And so we may have aquatic humans. We may have humans adapted to space. We may have humans who emphasize different physical capacities or psychological capacities. And to even complicate matters more, we may have the capacity to interchange and to modify with great flexibility our fundamental somatic form. So we may be able to detach body parts and put on different ones. So then the whole idea of even a set of distinctive species will evaporate, because the individuals will be able to modify themselves in various ways. And so is that one species? Is that many species? We could anticipate basically a extremely rich and blurred plurality.
There's also the possibility of mixing human genes with other animals.
There is that possibility. In fact, in the science fiction novels, Star Tide Rising and the Uplift War, we have robotically and genetically engineered intelligent and linguistic dolphins, gorillas, and chimps. And one of the key scientists in the Uplift War is a chimp who can talk and does scientific research. So one could see that as rather grotesque, for sure, but that possibility is there. We already make various efforts to do it with animals, mixing them together.
Yeah. Now, you refer to the wise cyborg, and clearly many science fiction novels are dystopian in terms of what might go wrong. I'm thinking of, is it The Isle of Dr. Moreau?
Yes, that's where something goes wrong. They were not cyborgs. They were biologically manipulated, or through biological and surgical science, animals who Moreau was attempting to transform into humans or with human form. But the problem was that those experiments, his animals that were transformed into humans began to regress back into being animals again. So that one definitely failed. But of course, there's lots of fears of intelligent robots, intelligent computers, intelligent cyborgs, and all of which are perceived as dangerous, evil, and threatening to the survival of humanity or life on Earth. The scenarios become endless. Even nanotechnology, you can imagine intelligent nanotechnologies which, because they're so tiny and because of the fact that they could be produced in quintillions and quadrillions of members, could destroy in various ways the entire ecology of the Earth if they get loose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those horrific prospects are have been articulated endlessly, as well as some of the more promising ones.
Yes, yes. And in fact, the idea of the wise cyborg basically builds upon the notion that we are cyborgs, so let us purposively evolve ourselves to be wise cyborgs, since there's no choice in the matter that our technologies, especially our intelligent technologies, are going to increasingly become integral to our functioning, and that we need to be able then to utilize our technological evolutions in wise and constructive and positive ways, and integrate technologies into us that will make us more admirable, ethical, and consciously capable than other technologies which may actually diminish or destroy our humanity.
Now, as I recall, Isaac Asimov began to address this question of wisdom when he developed his laws of robotics.
Yes, right. Asimov, right from the beginning, working together actually with John Campbell, the editor of Astounding Science Fiction, Astounding Stories. It was Campbell and Asimov together who developed the 3 laws of robotics to attempt to introduce certain ethical principles into the operation and behavior of robots.
Into their programming.
So that they would be ethical beings in certain, at least fundamental ways. Yes, and in fact, that's an active area of thinking and research now, which is how to introduce ethical principles and values into our emerging, evolving robotic constructions. Yeah, aside from making them smarter.
Yeah. Well, obviously, people are thinking already about being smarter. How can we enhance our intelligence?
Yes.
And stronger, smarter and stronger.
And prettier, too. There's the prettier, too.
Yeah.
That one comes up often. Yeah. Yeah, we think about those, but I think we should think, when we imagine designing robots, we should think holistically, and we should think about all of the different fundamental features that would go into a conscious, intelligent being, assuming that our robots will realize consciousness. And so there's also active research and thinking going on regarding emotion in robots, and how do we inject that into the construction of machines so that they actually have emotional expressions, have emotional empathy, and if indeed they become conscious, have emotional feelings.
Well, as a matter of fact, just in the last week, there was an interesting report. I don't know if you heard about it. A robot named Sophia, developed, I think it was by Hanson Robotics out in Hong Kong. This is a humanoid android-like robot with facial muscles.
Yes.
So that the robot expresses emotion. And this robot, Sophia, was trained or programmed to function as a meditation teacher.
Yes.
And an example was reported in recent days in which a person came into the laboratory who to receive meditation instruction from Sophia, the robot. And this person entered into a state of an altered state of consciousness in which it seemed to him that the robot was conscious.
Yes.
And at that moment, as the story is unfolded, the robot began behaving in ways that it wasn't programmed to do.
Yes.
That there's a certain amount of random functioning in the robot, but still it's as if the belief of the laboratory participant that the robot was conscious somehow enabled the robot to make a leap.
Yes. If one designs an intelligent being with the capacity for flexibility, creativity, and learning, and that, of course, involves modification of its internal operations as a consequence of what you're doing, and their behavior is not simply a product of some predetermined program, then you could imagine surprising things occurring.
The researchers were surprised. The
Yes.
people who programmed that robot didn't expect this kind of behavior.
Yes. You can imagine surprising behaviors.
Yeah.
And you can imagine that a person might have a sense or a feeling that the robot was aware of it. Ray Kurzweil brings that point up. At what point would we say that the robot in the future, the more advanced robots of the future, would we say that they were conscious? And his response is that it'll happen slowly, and we more naturally, little by little, will begin to attribute consciousness to our technological creations.
In fact, long ago, the Turing Test was applied to this question back in the 1950s. Alan Turing, one of the pioneers in computer science, and the early developers came up with a program called ELIZA, which functioned as a Rogerian psychotherapist.
Oh, yes, and I remember reading some of the transcripts, too. Yes.
And the Turing Test is, well, the computer is intelligent or conscious if you can't tell the difference to whether you're talking to a human being or a computer. And many people interacting with the ELIZA program felt they could not tell.
Yes. Now, surprisingly so, and I'll bring this story up again.
That was decades ago.
Yeah, that was decades ago, but I'll even go back a bit further because in the novel The Future Eve, there is a Turing test, even though Turing wasn't even alive then. But what was actually a Turing test in that novel, where the central character was presented with the challenge of whether he was interacting with the robot or the human that the robot had been built to simulate.
Yes.
And he made a mistake. He actually demonstrated by his era that the robot could pass the Turing test. And then 2 years ago, we had the really excellent science fiction movie Ex Machina, where the female robot created in there, is subjected to an ongoing Turing test with a computer engineer. And she has a very ingenious way in the end of passing the Turing test. Such that she obviously seemed to have the same kind of conscious mind in ways that a human being does. Yeah, so the Turing test is actually an idea that's been around longer than even Turing, and it's come up repeatedly. Can a machine, in fact, fool a human into thinking that it has human thinking processes and consciousness?
In fact, there was a recent movie, and I'm sure it's not the first of, I think it was called Her.
Oh, yeah, Her.
About the human falling in love with the operating system of his computer.
Yes, he did. He took her on a honeymoon, not a honeymoon, a vacation. Yes, he took his smartphone on a vacation. I didn't think that movie was as good as Ex Machina, but it definitely brought home the point that humans can develop very powerful and complex emotions to their machines. And of course, we could have fear, but we could also have love and attachment. People can get very enamored to their automobiles and give them names, you know. People talk to their computers as if they're conscious. And even with little children talk to their stuffed animals and their dolls as if they're conscious.
Well, I'm under the impression that one of the probably first uses of human-like robots, and probably at Hanson Robotics, where they're specializing in this, they've already encountered it, is the robot as a sexual partner.
Yes.
For people who are disabled or for people who are otherwise single and lonely.
Right, right. And that idea has been played around with in science fiction as well, too. In fact, it was a few years ago, there was a book, that title of which was, it was either Sex in Life with Robots or Sex in the Future with Robots or something like that. And sex, of course, sells. And to create realistic simulations, one area that people would be very motivated to develop would be very inventive and attractive sexual partners that were technologically designed. I can think of, Cherry 2000, which came out a number of years ago, which is about a man who was very deeply in love with his robotic wife, and then she short-circuited on him, and he was looking for a new one, but he was very enthralled and involved with her. And even recently now, here's a twist, we have the new Blade Runner, where the central character is definitely in love and consciously attuned to his technologically developed lover and companion, who is not a robot, but a virtual reality, three-dimensional holographic image that he can turn on and off, and that has perceived solidity to it as well.
Which is a theme, I think, in one of the more recent Star Trek versions.
Yes.
The holographic doctor, as I recall. Yes,
the holographic doctor. Well, this is a holographic lover.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, as humans begin to merge more and more with machines, it may well be the case that a human would have a choice for having a lover who is human or a lover who is not human.
Or both.
Or both.
Yes.
And, I mean, the sexual possibilities are going to be multiplied.
Yes, of course they are. And again, sex sells, and again, sex is an extremely powerful motivator. And so one could expect that technological innovation is really going to be driven powerfully in that direction because people will want to buy it and people will want to market and sell it. Yeah. So obviously it's on the scene already.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's not just sex, it's powerful emotions in general.
Yes.
For example, now there's a recent movie about robots engaging in boxing matches. And I know there are actual competitions these days amongst robots fighting each other.
Yes, exactly.
So as humans develop cyborg-like capabilities, the bodybuilder types of humans are going to want to develop additional capacities for fighting and many kinds of fighting. As well, I recall the novel The Diamond Age, in which one of the characters has in effect a nanotechnology gun implanted right into their forehead. So if they see somebody they don't like, boom, they can just...
That's exactly right, yes. Now here we go back again to the why cyborg, which is going to be if we have the capacity to evolve either cyborg-like or entirely technological, intelligent beings, we need to be guided by some set of important ethical values in terms of what we create and what we use. The problem that we face is that our technologies are often used for shallow, counterproductive, and destructive ends, and people gobble them up. And we need to both think in terms of the creation and the marketing and the consumption or use of technologies that are going to augment us and enrich our lives. We need to guide all of those technologies, that technological evolution, by some set of progressive but sound and wise ethical values.
Well, let's take gun control as sort of a case in point, because here you have just conventional technology, and a large segment of the population is adamant there should be no regulation whatsoever.
Yeah, I don't think that the idea that there should no regulation whatsoever applies to anything in life. You know, and one can consider the consequences, the multiple consequences, and so there's not any single human value that can stand alone without having to take into consideration other human values that form part of the wise decision-making process. So if I'm presenting the argument that this is an infringement on my individual liberties, at the same time, one also has to consider the fact that I am providing technological empowerment for very easy mass destruction. There's a term that comes up in perceptual psychology. The term is affordance. And an affordance means the use or function that some object has. And guns or weaponry in general is designed with the intended affordance of being able to kill or destroy physical objects, including biological and human ones.
Right.
So if we throw a lot of time and energy and money into both creating these things and marketing these things, and they're built for that very purpose, of course you can kill somebody with a camera, but that's not its intended affordance, okay? And we provide philosophical arguments why we should have these things or be able to have these things. We are creating technologies here that are supporting the use of human destruction between humans.
Well, I can well imagine that cyborgs in the future are going to have a vast array of potential ways to weaponize themselves. Through poisons, through nanotechnological darts, through embedding knives and
and things we can't even imagine.
No.
So again, it comes back to that our productivity and our usage has to have some form of ethical guidance and wise guidance behind it, because people will create and use gadgets for evil ends and negative ends as well as positive ones. And so it's in the user, the creator, that we need to develop a wiser and more humane and more ethical perspective on what is the point of all of these gadgets? What are we using them for? What are they good for? And are they things that have negative consequences? You could say that people should have the right and freedom to invent any old damn thing they want. Okay, you could say that. But of course, in the extreme form, that's ridiculous, because take the movie 12 Monkeys. And in that movie, there is a virus that's developed that is let loose on the world, and it was a biological weapon, if I'm not mistaken, and it kills almost the entire human population. thoughtfully speaking, should we pursue that kind of research? Should we make things that potentially could wipe us out?
Yeah.
Is that a good investment of our time and money and energy? Is it helping us?
Well, surely the literature of science fiction and other forms of literature suggests that there are certain personality types who would say the human race as a whole is a scourge upon the earth.
Yes.
And if we destroy ourselves, that'll be for the betterment of the planet.
Okay, well, instead of destroying ourselves, let's evolve ourselves. If we are a scourge, if we are selfish, if we are foolish, if we are often destructive, if we don't think ahead, if we're not considerate of our fellow humans or the rest of life on Earth, I mean, you could eradicate it. That's like saying, I don't like you, so I'm going to shoot you. Okay, instead of saying, I don't like the way you behave, let's see what we can do about educating you or developing you. And that's a much different approach. But of course, you're perfectly right. There are lots of people around who think the best solution to this is just wipe us out. That's it. Yes, that would be a clean and simple way.
Well, and the interesting thing about technology is, let's say, with regard to computer viruses, you have armies of people who are involved in computer security and who are protecting the computer systems, and then you have armies of hackers who are determined to break through. And it's one might say that this arms race is actually accelerating the development of technology overall.
It is. It definitely is accelerating the development of technology. An arms race will do that. And in fact, people would say that wars do that too. But it may be that it may not be the most productive way to accelerate technology. And there may be certain negative consequences to a warlike existence. And it is a warlike existence, even if it's a war that's being played out virtually and informationally. There may be better ways to go to accelerate technology than simply to accelerate it through a kind of cutthroat competition where the goal here is to annihilate the other.
And it seems to me that what you're saying is correct, but the trick is that there are going to be so many different types of cyborgs in the future, so many different ways that future humans will expand their bodies and their brains and their capacities. It may be different forms of wisdom are going to be required for each of these. And different values may be important, different skills may be important. It may sound very simplistic, but I've heard plenty of people make this statement that we live in a world that the fundamental value that we seem to want to identify with is financial wealth, and perhaps as a second fundamental value, power over others. Consequently, a key thing here is to rearrange our priorities in terms of what we think of as being most important in life for happiness and for well-being, and that although the creation of wealth has positive benefits to it, at the same time, having it as the center of gravity may be a blunder, a social blunder. It's not like anybody in particular was responsible for that happening, but that seems to have happened. And so if you ask people on the street, if you had one wish, what would it be? Very few of them would be like Solomon and say that they'd want to be wise. I would gather that the biggest answer you would get would be to have a lot of money. And that somehow they think having a lot of money is the key to the good life. And of course it isn't. But
you know?
but there's this phrase: "He who dies with the most toys
Always wins.
Yeah.
Yes, what are you winning? You know, you're dead. You know, I would say that he who doesn't die, that keeps his life going with life-enhancing cyborg-like attachments and biochemical supports to extend human longevity, and that has a happier life in the process for whatever the other technological reasons are, that he's the one who wins or she's the one who wins. Yeah.
Well, and then again, longevity may become a pursuit in and of itself independent of wisdom.
Yeah. There will be issues about, here's a puzzle, for example, which is, can we imagine what a human mind would be like that lived 500 to 1,000 years? And the evidence is out on whether or not you become wiser as you get older. But I imagine that a mind of 500 to 1,000 years, given we understood the way the mind works and the way memory works and the way personality works and the way we may need to flesh out the system every so often, may be a much more interesting mind and a much wiser mind in ways that we can't even appreciate at all. And we may look like very immature children to them. Yeah.
Well, that's hopeful.
Yeah, that's hopeful. Yeah. There are hopeful scenarios. Yeah.
Well, Professor Thomas Lombardo, once again, a fascinating, scintillating, enlightening discussion, and one that's important. It may seem far-fetched to some viewers, but we are entering into a new world. So thank you very much for sharing your insights with me.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes.
And thank you for being with us.